Chapter 5. Walker parked the transporter at Southwark and went the rest of the way on foot. His natural gait was all-purpose. Smarts called him the pavement chewer, and he ate up the half-mile to Blackfriars in no time. Turning left before the bridge, he smelt Borough Market before he saw it. Bread loaves and fish, Jesus on the south bank, its southern entrance a picture postcard of fruit and veg impossibly fresh, despite their carbon-fueled trudge across the world. Walker passed under the golden entrance and went directly through the market crowd, causing many a stall owner's nape hairs to bristle. They served their customers vaguely, hawkish eyes on the man in black jeans, black Timberland boots, and heavy jacket that cruised between groups of tourists high on organic produce. If the tourists had been paying attention, as the stall owners were, they would have avoided the rough man, a dark man, whose heavy brow fell over his eyes like bodies on razor wire. As it was, the holiday makers were too busy sniffing tulips and choosing plump Kalamata olives. Walker made his way swiftly through them, moving bodies to one side with a lenient forearm. He left the market at its riverside exit, and the store workers breathed easier. The tough-looking man was someone else's problem now. Walker tried to recall the last time he'd seen Michael Carter. He couldn't. He had fragments, an argument in some bar, the roar of a sports car, a hand around a throat, but he couldn't think of the exact day or moment. 10 years, it had to be. 10 years since Walker had sworn that he'd never see him again. He wound his way through the jigsaw of tight side streets that connected Borough Market to the south bank, emerging onto the river at Shakespeare's Globe. A pale sun burned cold from the opposite bank, flashing above the city, momentarily blinding Walker at his and its emergence. He squinted through the sharp rays, scanning the sightseers and school trips for Carter. Perhaps he wouldn't recognize him. Perhaps the skinny kid he knew a decade back had turned into a bloated and distended man, sporting the swollen face of a former pro-athlete, living on after-dinner speeches and lager. Walker contemplated calling Carter's mobile, but it wasn't necessary. As he stepped up onto the riverside walkway, he spotted the other man straight away. River wind and nostalgia cut into Walker, but instead of arguments, his memory handed him summers. Hot South London summers spent on mopeds, outrunning the law through a dope smokescreen. Michael was stood, facing away from Walker, looking out over the water under a bird-shit-covered lamppost. He wore the same childhood uniform of blue jeans and Nike Air trainers. As Walker approached, Michael leaned out over the river wall on tiptoes. He looked like a kid hoping to spot a corpse in the mud. Mike. Carter turned. The face was the same, but thinner. Walker could see cold sunlight through the hollow of his cheek. Thanks for coming, Walks. The wind whipped over the wall and blew open Carter's parka. He didn't flinch. You want to sit inside and get a coffee? Walker asked, nodding at the theatre. Carter shuffled his feet. Mind if we just keep moving, mate? I don't like being recognised, is all. Walker nodded. He doubted the Japanese tourists would know the man sipping a latte next to them used to play football for England, but he didn't want to make Michael any more uncomfortable than he clearly was. Restlessness rumbled through the man, flicking at his limbs and pulling at one corner of his mouth like a fishhook. Walker let Carter lead, and they started out along the south bank towards Waterloo. It was lunchtime, so a few hundred people had the same idea. Walker noticed Carter still had the same childhood walk, stiff across the shoulders, his right foot turned out in readiness for his instep to control a ball at any moment. More fucking nostalgia. I'm sorry for asking, Michael blurted out. Walker let the apology sit for a moment. What time's the meet? 3. Who are they? Turkish, I think. From Shoreditch. I don't know much. But you borrowed money off them? Yeah. How much? Michael licked his lips. 80k. Walker tried not to throw him in the Thames. How much have you got? On me, nothing. Stashed. Walker heard Carter swallow above the wind. Nothing. I had 9 grand, but I lost it this morning. Walker stopped moving. He placed his hands on the wall. They were big hands, disproportionate when compared with his height, and he clenched and unclenched them, allowing his knuckles to scrape against the concrete, the damaged tendon catching. He watched the river turn over on itself. How much do you want? If you lent me 25,000, I could have it squared away in a couple of hours. Through gambling? Yes, through gambling. How? Casino. Walker gave a grim laugh. Michael stopped and faced him. Mate, easy. I've done it loads of times. With that much money, you've won that much money. Yep. Carter nodded. For sure. 100%. Walker shook his head. You've lost that much too. I win more than I lose. Then why am I here? Carter paused. Walker could sense Michael prepping his pitch. He didn't want to listen, but knew he had to. He needed Michael to convince him. Now look, imagine it this way. He held his arms out wide. It's a Saturday morning. You've gone out last night and had a few beers with the boys, but it had been a long week and you weren't really feeling it. You sacked it off early, came home and fell asleep in front of ITV2. You wake up at silly o'clock with a bad back, and what's the first thing you do? Carter waited for an answer. Walker wasn't playing. You check your wallet, and lo and behold, there's 20 quid in there. Money you were more than happy to spunk up against the wall a previous night. Walker's eyes were drawn to a fleck of spittle that had gathered at the corner of Michael's mouth. So, it's sat there, winking at you, this 20, and you're never going to go and put it back in a bank, so it's just going to go and get frittered away here and there. So you buy a breakfast. 20 quid isn't 80k. Yeah, I know, but listen. Michael took a deep breath. You buy a bad fry-up, a paper, I don't know, a scratch card, whatever, and that's your 20 gone. Just like that. Puff. He clapped his hands together and made a passing pigeon flap. And all you've got to show for it is a page-free girl in a T-shirt, because they don't get their bangers out no more, a better luck next time from the card, and bad guts from all the pork. Michael grinned. Now, what you could have done is taken your spare 20 quid that we've already established you've already established, going to get wasted on a load of bollocks and split it up. The fleck of spittle had grown larger. A cheeky fiver on blackjack, see what the cards are saying. Another on the wheel, spread betting, low risk, low reward, but a slow burner that bumps the kitty up nicely. Then your last tenner, you've chucked it on Man U to beat West Brom at evens, but you don't care about the odds because United are at Old Trafford and it's West fucking Brom, and boom, you've doubled it, you tripled it, you fucking quadrupled it. You're 20 quid and suddenly you got 80 quid in your wallet. Now that can go back in a bank. And it's the same principle, mate. With a few more zeros. Exactly, same principle, but with a few more zeros. Michael was standing, arms out, one foot in front of the other like Fred Astaire on the skids. His coat flapped in the breeze, and Walker could see dried food on his T-shirt. Nostalgia flared up again. Michael's eyes shone, his mouth was still and his jaw set. He had the look of teenage faith, and suddenly they were back, running the ride together, desperate to make the start of a Spider-Man remake at Peckham Plex. Michael was way out in front, with Walker trying to keep up, Michael turning round and grinning, cursing him for being slow. They dodged round adults that swore and kissed their teeth. At the kiosk they tried to hide their bags of Woolworth sweets from the bored attendant who didn't care they hadn't bought his popcorn. Michael fishing in his pocket for the change he'd taken from his dad's wallet. Enough for both their tickets, and enough for him to get a kicking from the old man. slapping it onto the counter and dashing into the sweaty auditorium that smelt of Haribo and lint. Walker could almost feel the warmth from Michael's breath as he leant over and whispered in his ear, his teeth shining in the darkness. "Yeah, boy." "So, we good?" Walker came back to the present. He stared at Michael. His backdrop was the distant globe, its white walls crossed with oak beams and thatch, crimson flags flying in the breeze proclaiming its next production. Walker turned away from the fool and the theatre and moved on, Carter at his heels. "So, Walk, now what do you think? We good?" Carter repeated. They were heading through an underpass that didn't smell of piss. Walker wondered when the mayor's office was putting the plaque up. "Now tell me this wasn't your plan all along. Tell me that it wasn't always going to come to this, me being your last resort, hanging this over my head, knowing I ain't got a choice." "Fuck no," said Carter. "It was never supposed to go like this. I got the loan to invest, to make money, and I did. First week I was up like 10 grand. So why not pay it back then? But I got unlucky with some shares." "Shares? What the fuck do you know about shares?" Walker was ready to throw him in the Thames again. "And got burned when they dropped. Remember that massive boat that got stuck in a canal? The big one. A lot of it was to do with that. Jesus. Anyway, I know, Walk. I know it's bad." Michael had his head down as they moved, tucked in at Walker's elbow, following a step behind. He had to skip slightly to keep up. The path was drawing them away from the river and into the bank's tunnels. "So that was it," Walker remembered to breathe. "He realised you weren't the wolf of fucking Wall Street and thought, oh well, not to worry, I'll go see Walker. He'll help me out." "No." Michael pawed at Walker's coat sleeve with his own. "I had a plan, a good plan. I'd built back up to 9 grand yesterday, and I was ready to go and turn that into 80k, and it didn't work out, okay?" Carter stopped, his raised voice bouncing off the roof of the underpass. Passers-by turned to look, then turned to their shoes when they met Walker's flat-eyed stare. "Things just didn't play out like they should have." Walker watched Michael drag a coat sleeve across his mouth. He saw optimism bright in Michael, the same optimism he'd seen in his friend as a teenager, a belief that everything was going to be fine because everything always was fine. Life worked itself out at that age. Michael wiped his hand on his jeans, licked dry lips. The nervous tic returned, pulling at the tendons in his neck. Walker saw the optimism falter, flicker in a wind full of failure, made heavy by the smell of mud. Walker quickly looked away, moved onwards so he wouldn't have to watch his friend's optimism die. They emerged from the underpass into the cold sun, following the tide, twisting and turning through passageways in silence. Eventually the path opened out to a large grass square. A footbridge ran above their heads, snaking round to the Tate Modern. People dotted the square like crows, trampling a dirty lawn the same shade as the gallery. Walker found a bench away from the crowds and sat. Michael stayed standing, moving from foot to foot. Walker still couldn't look him in the face, so he watched the nikes turn brown on the grass. He didn't need to ask if the people Carter had borrowed the money from were serious. To be able to lend out 80k made them so. They weren't Jimmy down the pub lending out a fiver, no street corner loan sharks. They would be organised, connected. They'd have contingencies for non-payers. Walker stared at the concrete art gallery and hoped there were better-looking things inside. He'd lived in London his whole life, but had never stepped foot in the Tate. Looking at it now, he wasn't sure he wanted that to change. "So, what do we do, Walk?" Walker noticed that they were now a we. He sighed. "You ever been in there?" The question made Michael stop shuffling. He blinked once and looked back at the Tate. Yeah. I took Leonie once, before Hannah was born. What's it like? Walker asked. It's all right. Mike moved off his muddy spot and came to sit, slowly, next to Walker. Both men watched the building. It was a long time ago. What did you do in there? What did we do? Michael jiggled one knee, repeating the question with the unease of someone not used to conversation. We ate lunch. What about the art? The art? Yeah, the art. Paintings and shit. Walker kept on staring at the structure. I heard there's a real-life cow inside, floating in mid-air. Michael looked at Walker sideways. What? Walker shrugged. That's what I heard. A live cow? Yeah, floating about. Michael paused. Nah, I didn't see no cows. Both men took in the enormous structure, its chimney. A soft rain had started to fall. Saw a bed with jizz on it. You what? A big, messy bed. Clothes everywhere, duvet pulled back. Jizz on the sheets. Why? Not sure. They sat in silence at this. I've got about 50,000 saved. Michael swallowed. Thanks, man. I ain't doing it for you. I know, but still, thanks. I won't be able to get it today. It'll be tomorrow morning. Michael shuffled in his seat. They said 3 p.m. today, Walk. They're going to have to wait. I haven't got that cash just sitting about ready to go. I need to make a call, and even then it takes time for the funds to clear. Mike was back to fidgeting on the bench. These people, they don't wait. Walker spoke calmly. That's why we're going to go, together, to see them, at 3 p.m. today, like it was arranged. We'll explain there's a delay, and they'll have the full amount repaid tomorrow. You'll come with me? Yes. Mike swallowed again. Then tomorrow morning, I'll take you to Leicester Square and you can do your Rain Man shit. Carter let out air. His knee stopped jumping. Thanks, Walk. Walker stood and kicked some life into his legs. The soft rain had turned to steady drizzle. He watched the crowds run for cover under the gallery's atrium. Finally, he looked at Michael. Leave. Get out of town. Get out of the country. Europe somewhere. Spain. Disappear. I can't. Yes, you can. Of course you can. You could become a coach. Kids football or something. You'd have to start at the bottom, but you'd work your way up in no time. You're good with kids. They like you. Walker's voice had gotten lighter. The dream was good. It made sense. Somewhere warm. Seville. Fuck it. Barcelona. Your name still means something. It would open doors. You'd learn the language, eat tapas. You could have a good life, Mike. Michael was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. His head was in his palms, the heels of both hands pressing hard into his eyes like a kid counting at hide and seek. Walker stopped talking, felt a tightness in his chest. I can't, Michael whispered. Why can't you? Carter didn't move. What have they got? Adrenaline swamped Walker's innards, turning him sick. Suddenly he realized he'd been asking all the wrong questions. These people, these serious people, they wouldn't just lend money out to anyone. They'd need a down payment, something to hold against the debtor, a strong incentive to pay. Walker stood over Carter. Rainwater ran off his face onto the other man. He reached down and lifted Carter to his feet like he was pulling a drowning dog from a river. Michael looked at Walker straight. His voice was dull. Everything. They've got everything.